I didn't lose my family all at once. I lost them in a single living room, surrounded by people who had loved me my entire life, while they stared at me like I was already gone. One photo, one lie, and suddenly I was no longer a daughter, no longer a sister, no longer a fiancée. I was a traitor. It happened the morning after a night I barely remembered. I walked into my parents' house thinking they were worried about me. My phone had died. I'd disappeared. I assumed fear had brought everyone together. Instead, I walked into a trial. My mother sat stiffly on the couch. My father wouldn't look at me. My older sisters were already seated, their expressions closed. Judgment passed before I'd spoken a word. And standing near the window, his back rigid, his face unfamiliar, was the man I was supposed to marry. George, the love of my life since I was 13 years old. The boy who lived 3 houses down. The boy who grew up at our dinner table. The boy who had put a ring on my finger just 8 months earlier and promised me forever. He turned toward me, and I knew something had shattered. "How could you do this to me?" he asked. I didn't even understand the question. Before I could speak, before I could explain about the club, the dizziness, the missing time, the dead phone, my sister Laura stepped forward. She called me a liar. She said I flirted with men all night. She said I left the club willingly. She said I walked out with another man while she went to the bathroom. Then she raised her phone. A single photo filled the screen. Me, unsteady, half-conscious, being guided out of a club by a man I barely knew. His hand on my back. From the outside, it looked like guilt. From the inside, it felt like drowning. I begged them to call him. I begged them to ask questions. I begged the man who had known me for over a decade to look me in the eyes and see the truth. Instead, my sister dialed the number, and the man on the other end of the line told them we'd slept together. Multiple times. That was the moment my life split in two. Because once those words were spoken, nothing I said mattered anymore. George walked out without another word. His parents followed. And when the door closed behind them, my mother stood up and slapped me across the face. "You're not welcome here anymore," she said. That night I became homeless. By morning I was erased, and it would take 2 years for the truth to crawl back out of the dark, long after I had learned how to survive without the people who destroyed me. Before I tell you how everything collapsed, you need to understand what my life looked like before that night, because the betrayal didn't just destroy a relationship. It erased a history that had taken more than a decade to build. I was 24 years old when my life fell apart, but my story with George started when I was 13. We met in middle school. He lived 3 houses down from my parents' place, close enough that our bikes ended up tangled together in the driveway more often than not. We were friends first, real friends, homework partners, movie night companions, the kind of bond that grows slowly, naturally, without you realizing it's becoming something permanent. By high school, our families were inseparable. George was an only child, and my parents treated him like a son. He had his own seat at our dinner table, his own mug in our kitchen. My dad taught him how to fix things around the house. My mom packed him leftovers whenever he went home. I had 2 older sisters, Diane and Laura. Diane, the oldest, was distant but reliable. Laura was different. Growing up, Laura always needed more attention, more support, more forgiveness. When she struggled, my parents stepped in immediately. Tutors when she failed classes. A brand new car when she totaled the old one driving drunk. Second chances stacked neatly on top of each other, no questions asked. George was always there for her. When Laura spiraled in college, when her drinking nearly got her expelled, George drove 4 hours in the middle of the night to help her deal with the police. He let her stay in his apartment for weeks while she got back on her feet. Everyone called it kindness. I called it loyalty. I never imagined it could turn into something dangerous. George and I didn't start dating until college. By then, it felt inevitable, easy, like finally stepping into something that had always been waiting for us. We were together for years before he proposed. When he did, on my birthday, my parents threw a party that felt like a wedding already. Champagne bottles everywhere. My mom calling relatives overseas. My dad smiling like he'd just completed his life's mission. Even Laura seemed happy, or so I thought. Our wedding was set for October. We were only 8 months engaged when everything ended, but those 8 months felt solid, safe, like the beginning of a long, predictable future. Then, 2 months before it all collapsed, Laura texted me out of nowhere. She asked if I wanted to go clubbing together. It surprised me. We'd never done things like that. But she said she wanted to be closer, to finally fix our relationship. I wanted to believe her. I didn't know that night would be the last time I ever trusted my sister. The club was never my scene. Loud music, flashing lights, strangers pressed too close. None of it felt natural to me. But Laura seemed energized, almost excited in a way I hadn't seen before. She kept ordering drinks, laughing too loudly, pulling me toward the dance floor like she was trying to prove something. I told myself this was progress, that this was what sisters did. After a few drinks, I started to loosen up. The edges of the room softened. My body felt warmer, heavier. Laura pointed out a man across the room and made a joke about him being cute. She walked over to talk to him, leaving me alone at the table. When she came back, her mood had changed. She looked irritated, tight smile, stiff shoulders. She said he'd rejected her, and then casually mentioned that he'd asked for my number instead. I laughed it off, told her he wasn't worth it, that rejection happens. She didn't respond. She just stared at her phone and then said she needed to use the bathroom. That was the last clear moment of the night. Minutes passed, then more. I texted her, no response. I went to the bathroom. She wasn't there. Meanwhile, people kept offering drinks, shots, cocktails, rounds I didn't order but didn't question. I remember thinking I should slow down, but my body felt disconnected from my thoughts. My head started spinning in a way that didn't match how much I'd actually consumed. My hands felt wrong, heavy, uncoordinated. I stood up to leave. That's when I ran into Mark, one of Laura's old friends, someone she'd briefly dated years earlier. I barely knew him, but he recognized me immediately. "You okay?" he asked. I told him I was taking a cab home, that I felt sick. He said he was leaving too and offered to share one since it was late. In hindsight, I should have said no, but in that moment, all I wanted was to sit down and stop the room from spinning. In the cab, I tried to find my phone. My fingers wouldn't cooperate. The screen blurred. I leaned my head against the window and focused on breathing. That's the last thing I remember. When I woke up, I wasn't in my bed. I was on a couch, stiff, unfamiliar, my mouth dry, my head splitting open with pain. My phone sat on a glass table, completely dead. Mark walked in holding water and painkillers. He said I'd passed out in the taxi. He said he didn't know my parents' address. He said he let me sleep on the couch. At the time, it sounded reasonable. I thanked him. I left immediately. I had no idea that while I was trying to piece together my missing hours, someone else was already rewriting them for me. The moment I walked into my parents' house, I knew something was wrong. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I felt. The air was too still, too heavy, like the room had already made a decision and was waiting for me to catch up. My mother sat rigidly on the couch, hands folded in her lap. My father stood near the window, staring outside as if he couldn't bear to look at me. Diane sat beside Laura, her expression unreadable, lips pressed tight. And then there was George. He stood up the second he saw me. His face wasn't angry at first. It was worse than that. It was hollow, like something precious had been ripped out and replaced with certainty. "How could you do this to me?" he said. I blinked. "Do what?" I stepped forward instinctively, reaching for him, but he pulled away like my touch burned. Before I could explain, before I could even understand what I was being accused of, Laura moved. She stepped into the center of the room like a prosecutor who'd been waiting for her cue. "Stop pretending," she snapped. "You know exactly what you did." I felt my chest tighten. "Laura, I don't—" She cut me off and raised her phone. The screen lit up. A photo. Me, unsteady, leaning toward Mark as we exited the club, his hand on my back, guiding me forward. From the outside, it looked intimate. From the inside, I remembered barely being able to stand. I opened my mouth to explain, but Laura was already talking. Fast, confident, rehearsed. "She flirted all night," she said. "She left with him while I was in the bathroom." "That's not true," I whispered. George's jaw clenched. His mother began to cry quietly. I begged them to call Mark. I begged them to ask questions. I begged George, please, to look at me and remember who I was. Laura dialed the number. She put the phone on speaker. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out again. Mark answered. Laura asked him what happened that night. There was a pause. Then he said it. "She begged me to take her home," he told them. "We slept together, more than once." The room spun. I screamed. I accused Laura of setting me up. I sobbed. I pleaded with George to believe me. He didn't even look at me. He just turned and walked out. His parents followed. The door closed behind them with a finality that echoed through my body. My mother stood up slowly, and then her hand connected with my face. The sound was sharp, final. "Get out," she said. "You're not my daughter anymore." In one morning, I lost my fiancé, my family, my home, and no one asked a single question. I don't remember how I left my parents' house. I just remember standing on the sidewalk with a numb face, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't unlock my phone, my mind replaying the same sentence over and over again. You're not my daughter anymore. The words didn't sound real. They floated, detached from meaning, like something said in a movie. But my cheek burned where my mother had hit me, and that pain grounded everything. I called George, straight to voicemail. I texted, I begged, I explained in fragments about the club, the dizziness, the missing time, the dead phone. No response. By that evening, I understood something terrifying. No one was coming to save me. I spent the first few nights on my college friend Jen's couch. She didn't ask questions. She just handed me a blanket, a glass of water, and let me cry until my chest ached. At night, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else's apartment, wondering how a life could disappear in less than 24 hours. I replayed every detail. The drinks, the way my body stopped obeying me, Laura leaving for the bathroom and never coming back. Something about it felt wrong, off, but no one wanted to hear that. Once the story was written, the truth didn't matter. A week later, my mother texted me. She said she had thrown all my belongings in the trash. She said I was disgusting, embarrassing, dead to her. I felt something in me crack, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a bone hair lining under pressure. I tried contacting my family anyway. Diane wouldn't respond. Laura blocked me. My father said nothing. Christmas came. I went back to my parents' house, hoping, stupidly, that time had softened them. The house was dark, empty. Later that day, Jen called me, her voice hesitant. She'd seen photos online. My parents, both my sisters, George's parents, all smiling together on a Christmas vacation in Colorado. They looked happy, like I had never existed. That was the moment I stopped trying to go home. I blocked everyone. I put George's engagement ring in an envelope and mailed it to his parents without a note. And then I did the only thing I could do. I ran. Running didn't look dramatic. It looked like stuffing my life into trash bags and climbing a staircase that creaked with every step, leading to a tiny apartment above a restaurant, 2 hours away from everything I'd ever known. Jen's cousin owned the place. He needed staff. He offered me a job and a room so small I could touch both walls if I stretched my arms out. I said yes without hesitation. I worked 10, sometimes 12 hours a day. Opening shifts, closing shifts, doubles when someone didn't show up. I learned to move fast, speak less, and never ask for help. The exhaustion kept the memories quiet. At night, I lay on the narrow bed listening to the restaurant hum below me, clattering dishes, muffled laughter, life going on without me. Sometimes the stairs would creak as someone climbed them, and my heart would jump, half expecting someone from my old life to appear and say there'd been a mistake. No one ever did. Months passed. I saved money. I ate standing up. I learned how to be alone. Eventually, I moved into a small one-bedroom condo and got promoted to assistant manager. People started trusting me, with keys, schedules, decisions. It felt strange to be believed again. 2 years went by. Then, one evening, there was a knock on my door. I opened it and nearly slammed it shut again when I saw him. George. He looked thinner, older. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion, like he hadn't slept in months. "I need to talk to you," he said. My legs went weak. He told me Laura had confessed. She admitted she orchestrated everything, that she'd planned the setup, that she'd asked Mark to lie, that she'd said she did it because she thought George deserved better than me, because she loved him like a brother. I felt sick. George said my family wanted to see me. I told him to leave. A week later, my father showed up unannounced. The smell of his cologne made me vomit. He told me my parents were divorcing, that Laura was dead to him, that my belongings were still boxed up at the house. I asked him why no one listened to me 2 years ago. He cried. I didn't forgive him. I told him reconciliation might be possible, eventually, but only on my terms. That night, I called Laura's husband. I warned him. And for the first time since the lie began, the truth started destroying lives that weren't mine anymore. People think the darkest moment is when everything is taken from you. It isn't. The darkest moment is when you finally get the truth and realize it doesn't give you back what you lost. After my father left that night, I sat alone on my couch in the quietest apartment I had ever lived in. No shouting, no accusations, no slammed doors, just silence heavy enough to press against my ribs. I had spent 2 years believing I was disposable. 2 years wondering if I'd imagined everything, if I'd been careless, reckless, irresponsible enough to deserve what happened to me. I replayed the night at the club so many times that it became distorted, unreliable. Trauma does that. It blurs edges. It makes you doubt your own memory. And now I knew. I had been drugged. I had been set up. I had been betrayed by my own sister. And still nothing felt repaired. My family wasn't magically restored. George wasn't suddenly safe to love again. My parents' house wasn't my home anymore. If anything, the truth reopened wounds I'd sealed, just enough to survive. I thought about the nights I slept on couches, staring at ceilings that weren't mine. The holidays I spent alone while they laughed together in photos. The birthdays that passed without a single message. They had mourned me. Not as someone wronged, but as someone shameful. That night, I cried harder than I had the day my mother slapped me. Because then, at least, I still believed someone might eventually come back for me. Now I knew they hadn't even tried. George texted, apologized, said he didn't know how to fix what he'd broken. My father called, said he wished he could undo everything. Diane reached out, said she'd had doubts but didn't want to go against the family. Each message landed like salt in an open wound. I realized something terrifying. The people who hurt me the most weren't monsters. They were ordinary people who chose comfort over truth. And that meant it could happen again. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked older, harder, quieter, but she was still standing. And for the first time, I understood that healing wasn't about forgiveness. It was about deciding who would ever be allowed close enough to hurt me again. The turning point didn't come with a scream or a dramatic confrontation. It came quietly, on an ordinary evening, when I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not waiting for my family to apologize, not waiting for George to redeem himself, not waiting for the past to make sense. I was waiting for myself to choose what came next. I met with my father on my terms. Public place, limited time, clear boundaries. He didn't argue. He listened. He didn't ask for forgiveness, just for a chance to earn back a fraction of trust he'd burned. That mattered. Diane came next. She admitted she'd stayed silent because silence was easier than being isolated. I told her honesty doesn't count retroactively. If we were going to rebuild anything, it would be slow and conditional. She accepted that too. George asked to meet again. I agreed, but not because I missed him. I needed closure that didn't depend on his guilt. We met at a park halfway between our lives. He handed me recordings, confessions from Laura and Mark, proof, documentation, evidence that could never be erased again. I listened to them later alone. Hearing Laura's voice calmly describe how she planned my destruction made my stomach turn. She spoke about loyalty, about protecting George, about sacrifice, as if she were the victim of her own cruelty. In that moment, something settled inside me. I didn't hate her. I was done with her. That distinction changed everything. I accepted a promotion at work, took on responsibility that terrified me 2 years ago, built something that belonged to me and no one else. When my mother reached out, angry, demanding, accusing, I blocked her without explanation. When Laura tried to contact me, I refused. When George asked if there was still hope, I told him the truth. Love doesn't survive when belief is optional. That was the moment I took my power back. Not by punishing anyone, but by refusing to negotiate my worth ever again. The fallout didn't explode all at once. It unfolded slowly, painfully, like a building collapsing inward, one support beam at a time. Laura's confession didn't just reach George. It spread. Her husband confronted her. Her lies unraveled. Her reputation, carefully protected for years, fractured under the weight of her own words. I heard through other people that her marriage didn't last long after that the man she'd sworn loved her like family discovered how easily she rewrote reality to suit herself. That trust, once broken so deliberately, doesn't regenerate. My mother defended her. Of course she did. She called Laura sick, misunderstood, in need of grace. She accused me of being cruel for refusing to reconcile. She said she couldn't lose 2 daughters. I realized then she'd already chosen which one mattered more. My father didn't. He finalized the divorce, cut contact with Laura, moved into a smaller place closer to my city, not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet attempt to show effort. He didn't ask to be forgiven. He asked how to do better. That difference mattered. George's world collapsed in a different way. The people who'd encouraged him to forget me now looked away when the truth surfaced. The certainty he'd clung to, that I'd betrayed him, turned into something uglier, guilt he couldn't undo. He admitted something that chilled me, that once Laura's story took hold, it became easier to believe it than to question it. easier than sitting with doubt, easier than risking being wrong. That admission told me everything I needed to know. There was no villain monologue, no courtroom justice, no satisfying revenge, just consequences. I walked away calmly from my mother, from Laura, from the version of George who chose certainty over trust. And I did it without shouting, without demanding apologies, without explaining myself a final time. Because the truth didn't need me to defend it anymore. I used to think survival meant enduring, staying quiet, taking the hit, waiting for the people who hurt you to realize their mistake. I was wrong. Survival is choosing yourself even when it costs you everyone else. Today, my life looks nothing like the one I lost 2 years ago. I run 2 restaurant locations now. I manage teams. I make decisions that ripple outward. The woman who once slept on borrowed couches now signs leases and negotiates contracts without shaking hands. I rebuilt my life brick by brick without asking permission. My father and I meet for lunch twice a month. We talk about neutral things, sometimes about the past, sometimes not. Trust is fragile, but effort exists, and that's where reconciliation begins, if it ever does. Diane and I are cautious, honest, learning how to exist without pretending nothing happened. My mother is no longer part of my life, and that grief is real. But peace and grief can coexist. George moved away. We said goodbye without drama, without bitterness. Just 2 people acknowledging that love isn't enough when belief fails. I didn't get justice the way movies promise. I got something better. Freedom. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to understand, it's this. Being falsely accused doesn't destroy you. Being silenced does. And the moment you stop begging to be believed and start believing yourself instead, that's when your life actually begins. I lost my family. I lost my fiancé. But I gained a self I will never abandon again.